Baikoi, an hour drive north of Romania's capital city, Bucharest. Mihai and Teofil, a Romanian-French duo, set off on a mission deep into the country's oil region. The so-called methane hunters have made the trip to track leaks of this powerful greenhouse gas, escaping from fossil fuel facilities.
We're going up the hills to see some very old oil infrastructure. It's like the first producing region in Romania. It's part of the Subcarpathian oil belt. That's how they call it.
That would be an interesting case to see if there are emissions at an oil field right next to settlements where you have people living.
Teofil has uncovered cases of methane leaks in more than 15 EU countries. It's now his third visit to Romania, home to one of the largest oil reserves in the continent, and the worst leaks he has seen. The facilities here are owned by Petrom, the national oil company.
I work with an infrared camera. This type of camera has a special sensor that can detect methane gas, revealing it to the human eye. I also have a gas mask because I don't know if I'll be exposed to toxic gases. And this is a gas alarm. If it starts making loud noises and vibrating, that means we need to leave.
Which one do you want to check first?
You can check that one first. There was a pipe leaking.
In the world of climate activism, only a dozen people are certified to operate infrared cameras. Equipped with highly sensitive lenses, they can make the invisible visible.
It's venting from the hatch. It's venting from the top of it.
From the hatch on top.
The indiscriminate release of methane is a common practice in the fossil fuel industry. The gas is both invisible and odorless.
When you're an oil company, you sell oil. So what you don't want is large amounts of gas mixing with your oil. That's why they release this methane gas into the atmosphere.
It's the same gas that is used to heat homes around the world. But instead of capturing it and selling it, methane is discarded as waste, a lose-lose situation for the industry's pockets and the planet. When we think of the climate crisis, carbon dioxide usually comes to mind. Methane, however, is not only the second largest contributor to global warming, it's also 84 times more potent than CO2. The fossil fuel industry is one of the main sources of emissions. The gas, known as CH4, is generated as a byproduct of oil extraction. Operators deliberately release it into the atmosphere to reduce pressure, a process known as venting. They can also burn or flare excess methane. The team also encounters another scenario: accidental emissions. In this case, a tank leaking.
You want to check that one right there? Because it seems, like it's new.
There's a lot of gas here. We're far away, but I can still see it very clearly. It's even reflecting off the tank.
Further away, they make an even more alarming discovery.
I don't even need my camera to know there's methane. You can see the gas bubbling on the surface of this oil slick. It's really outrageous because an oil slick will also infiltrate the soil and water.
Since 2021, Clean Air Task Force has documented 850 oil sites around the globe, of which 600 were found to release methane.
The problem is that this is not an isolated case. It's not just a single oil well. They're everywhere. There are thousands of them around the world that will spew methane into the atmosphere.
According to the International Energy Agency, methane is responsible for about 30% of the world's warming since the Industrial Revolution. Concentrations of the gas reaching record levels over the last 20 years. impact is not just limited to the climate. Methane is always found alongside other toxic gases, which have been linked to lung disease and cancer. Baikoi is home to 16,000 people. This elderly woman is the only one who agreed to speak to us on camera. A few yards separate her house from the oil fields.
Some days I can't stand the smell of gas and oil. We complained to Petrom, and they told us if we're not happy, we can take them to court. But a lifetime of work wouldn't be enough to gather the money to win against them.
She's finally able to see with her own eyes what she has been exposed to for the last 40 years.
You can see bubbles. That's methane coming out. It's always associated with other toxic gases. They're heavier than air particles. If they enter the lungs, they can be deadly.
What can I do except worry about my health?
France 24 made several attempts to contact Petrom, but the company declined our request for comment, providing instead a written statement.
Several initiatives have been put in place. Contracts with specialized third parties for emissions detection, quantification, monitoring and reporting services are under implementation. Since 2019, we've been performing regular inspections with infrared cameras in over 350 production sites.
Around the world, industry efforts remain limited. But a new law approved by EU countries in August 2024 could soon make it more difficult for methane leaks to go unpunished. It's the first regulation of its kind in the world, forcing fossil fuel companies to report and limit their emissions or face penalties.
We don't, to this day, have an idea of the number of installations emitting methane. Operating installations, inactive wells, abandoned mines. Some countries know that they have thousands of them, but they don't know exactly how many or where they are. And the regulation is asking them to do an inventory and to report on that inventory within a certain amount of time.
Bringing transparency, the first major step to holding fossil fuel giants accountable. New technology is set to be a key ally.
Into flight, Falcon 9 has cleared the
Launched into space in March 2024, a satellite owned by the nonprofit EDF will orbit the Earth 15 times a day in search of the gas, mapping emissions in real time. It's the first time an NGO acquires a satellite to hunt down polluters for a price tag of $88 million.
The impact of the European methane regulation is not local only, it's global. And to implement this both at the domestic level and the global level, you need data. So what MethaneSat is going to be doing is allowing us to look at production regions like Romania in the EU and all these other places where Europe is getting its oil and gas.
From 2027, imports into the EU will have to comply with the bloc's regulation, putting the spotlight on emissions outside its borders, including the world's biggest methane emitter.
You can look at Texas, which is one of the major oil and gas producers in the world. So we can zoom in and see where do hotspots take place. So the places in yellow are the places with highest emissions. We can keep zooming in to see where it is. And then the different dots are distinct sources with high emissions. So these different layers of information is exactly what we need to take action and to make this transparent to the world.
But once sources of emissions have been identified, what exactly can companies do? We're back in Romania, in the Methane County. Back in 2023, Teofiled measured high emissions here. But today, he's pleasantly surprised. Petrom has installed a gas recovery unit.
The oil wells here have been equipped with a system that captures methane and sends it to the other side of the facility over there, where it's purified in those two tanks. It's then processed and sold locally.
And yet, right across from this oil installation, another leak next to workers.
My guess is that the oil wells have not been connected to the recovery unit. So the hatch is open and it releases all the gas being produced in the oil extraction process.
These nutting donkeys have always been part of the landscape here. Seen as a source of economic development, oil installations and their emissions have largely gone under the radar. In the city of Campina, there's even a functioning well next to a playground and a middle school. Just 3 years ago, the case of this park shocked the two activists. An abandoned well was found to be leaking continuously, with children playing in the background. These images caused a public outcry, forcing Petrom to act.
It was absolutely great and empowering. So this is a very good example of our work, because after this was reported, the company came in and plugged it. And then subsequent years after we checked it, there were no more emissions, or none that we could see. So, this can be done.
This year, still no emissions to report.
No, nothing here. I don't see any methane. This well is taken care of. All you need really is checking installations regularly to make sure no methane escapes. That's the only way to limit its impact on the climate and the communities.
Tackling methane leaks is often said to be an easy fix for the climate. According to the International Energy Agency, slashing emissions by 3/4 in 6 years would require $75 billion in funding. Less than 2% of the income generated by the fossil fuel industry in 2022.